The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked through the ornate corridors she had come to know so well. Her heels clicked against the marble floors, echoing in the vast hallways adorned with centuries-old portraits of monarchs past. Today felt different, though she couldn't quite place why. The usual warmth in the palace staff's greetings seemed muted, and even her personal secretary had avoided eye contact during their morning briefing. Camilla adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. She was expecting her sister Annabelle and her son Tom to arrive for afternoon tea, a tradition they had maintained even after she became queen consort. These family gatherings meant everything to her, especially now that the weight of royal duties often kept her isolated from the people who knew her simply as Camilla. Not as a member of the royal family, King Charles sat in his private study, surrounded by leather-bound books and official documents that required his attention. His face wore the stern expression that had become increasingly common since ascending to the throne. The pressures of kingship had changed him in ways that sometimes surprised even those closest to him. Today, he held a thick folder marked "Confidential" that his private secretary had delivered with unusual urgency. The contents of the folder painted a troubling picture. Intelligence reports, newspaper clippings, and photographic evidence suggested that certain members of Camilla's family had been sharing private royal information with tabloid journalists. The evidence was circumstantial but damning enough to raise serious security concerns. Phone records showed suspicious calls to known media contacts, and timing patterns indicated that family visits often preceded leaked stories about private royal matters. Charles felt a familiar weight settling on his shoulders. Throughout his life, he had watched his family navigate similar scandals and betrayals. He remembered how his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had handled such situations with quiet resolve, prioritizing the institution above personal relationships. Now, faced with his own difficult decision, he understood the impossible choices that came with wearing the crown. His personal protection officer knocked gently on the study door before entering. "Your Majesty, we've completed our review of the security protocols regarding family visits. Based on our assessment, we recommend implementing immediate restrictions on unsupervised access to royal residences for extended family members who aren't direct heirs to the throne." Charles nodded slowly, understanding the implications. This wasn't just about security protocols. It was about trust, family loyalty, and the painful reality that being king sometimes meant making decisions that would hurt the people he loved most. He thought about Camilla, probably at this very moment preparing for her family's visit, completely unaware of the storm that was about to engulf her world. Meanwhile, in her private sitting room, Camilla was arranging flowers in a crystal vase, humming softly to herself. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the photographs scattered across her writing desk, pictures of family gatherings, holidays in the countryside, and quiet moments that had shaped her life before royal duties consumed her days. She paused at a photograph of her children and grandchildren from last Christmas, their faces bright with laughter and joy. Her lady-in-waiting entered quietly, carrying a silver tea service. "Ma'am, shall I set up the usual arrangement in the blue drawing room for your guests this afternoon?" "Yes, please," Camilla replied, her voice carrying the warmth that endeared her to staff members throughout the palace. "And make sure we have those little cucumber sandwiches that Tom particularly enjoys. It's been such a long time since we've had a proper family afternoon together." As she spoke, neither woman was aware that 3 floors below, royal protection officers were receiving updated instructions about the day's security arrangements. The usual protocols for family visits were being quietly modified, though the specific reasons remained known only to a select few within the king's inner circle. Charles finally rose from his desk, the weight of his decision evident in his slow movements. He had spent the morning reviewing every piece of evidence multiple times, hoping to find some alternative that wouldn't require such drastic action. But the security implications were too serious to ignore, and the potential damage to the monarchy's reputation too significant to risk. He walked to the window overlooking the gardens where he and Camilla often took their evening strolls. Those peaceful moments seemed like a luxury from another lifetime now. The demands of kingship had already strained many of his personal relationships, and he feared that what he was about to do might damage the most important one of all. His private secretary appeared in the doorway, holding a sealed envelope. "Your Majesty, the formal documentation you requested has been prepared. Shall I deliver it to Her Majesty now, or would you prefer to speak with her personally first?" Charles closed his eyes briefly, feeling the full weight of the crown that sat invisible but ever present upon his head. "I'll speak with her myself. Please ask Her Majesty to meet me in my study in 1 hour, and ensure that we're not disturbed." As afternoon approached, Camilla made her final preparations for the family visit that would never happen. She checked her appearance in the ornate mirror, smoothed her dress, and practiced the warm smile that always made her loved ones feel welcome in the intimidating grandeur of palace life. In just a few hours, her understanding of trust, family, and her place in the royal hierarchy would be forever changed. The palace corridors seemed quieter than usual as staff members went about their duties with subtle awareness that something significant was unfolding behind the closed doors of the royal apartments. Change was coming to the House of Windsor, and those who had served the family for years recognized the signs of an approaching storm that would test the strength of bonds that many had assumed were unbreakable. The clock in King Charles's study chimed 3 times as Camilla made her way through the familiar corridors toward what she expected would be a brief meeting before her family's arrival. Her steps were light with anticipation, and she carried with her a small wrapped gift she had chosen for her newest grandchild. The afternoon sun streamed through the palace windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the Persian carpets beneath her feet. Charles stood when she entered his study, but his usual warm greeting was notably absent. The formal distance in his posture immediately caught her attention, though she attributed it to the stress that had been weighing on him lately. Being king had brought pressures she knew he struggled with daily, and she had learned to recognize the signs of his internal battles with the demanding role he never truly wanted but had always been destined to fulfill. "Please, sit down," he said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from his massive oak desk. The furniture arrangement itself felt wrong to Camilla. Usually, they sat together on the comfortable sofa near the fireplace when they needed to discuss personal matters. This formal positioning across the desk created a distance that made her stomach tighten with unspoken worry. She settled into the leather chair, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for him to begin. The silence stretched longer than comfortable, filled only by the steady ticking of the antique clock that had witnessed countless royal conversations over the decades. Charles seemed to be struggling with how to begin. His eyes focused on the papers spread across his desk rather than meeting her gaze directly. "It has been a security review," he finally began, his voice carrying the formal tone he used during official functions, rather than the warmth she was accustomed to in their private moments. "Our intelligence services have identified some concerning patterns regarding information leaks from within our immediate circle." Camilla felt a chill run through her despite the warmth of the afternoon. She had heard whispers about media leaks and security concerns, but those had always seemed like distant problems that affected other people, other families. The possibility that such issues might touch her own world had never seriously occurred to her. "I don't understand," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of patterns? What does this have to do with us?" Charles finally looked up, and the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. She had seen that expression before, during the darkest days of the media scrutiny surrounding their relationship years earlier, but she had hoped those times were behind them. The realization that they might be facing another crisis sent a wave of dread through her entire body. "Phone records, timing of media stories, and other intelligence sources have raised serious questions about information coming from your family members," he continued, each word seeming to cost him tremendous effort. "The evidence suggests that private royal information is being shared with journalists, either deliberately or carelessly." The words hit Camilla like physical blows. Her family, Annabelle, Tom Lavra, And the others who had stood by her through everything, being accused of betrayal, was almost impossible to comprehend. These were the people who had supported her when the entire world seemed against their relationship, who had celebrated quietly when she finally found happiness after years of struggle and public criticism. "That's impossible," she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "My family would never do such a thing. They understand how important privacy is, how careful we all have to be. There must be some mistake, some misunderstanding in the evidence." Charles reached for a thick folder on his desk, his movements deliberate and heavy. "I wish that were the case. I've spent weeks hoping we could find another explanation, but the pattern is too clear, too consistent to ignore. The security implications are too serious for us to take any chances." He opened the folder and turned it toward her, though he kept his hand positioned to close it quickly if needed. Even from her position across the desk, Camilla could see phone records with numbers highlighted in yellow, timestamps circled in red, and what appeared to be newspaper clippings with certain passages marked. The organized presentation of evidence suggested this investigation had been thorough and ongoing for some time. "How long has this been happening?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "How long have you known about these suspicions?" "The investigation began 6 weeks ago," Charles admitted, and the timeline hit her like another devastating blow. 6 weeks of normal conversations, family dinners, and shared moments, all while he harbored these terrible suspicions about the people she loved most. The feeling of isolation was immediate and overwhelming. Camilla's mind raced through recent family interactions, trying to remember conversations that might have been misinterpreted or innocent comments that could have been taken out of context. She thought about Sunday lunch conversations, casual phone calls, and the comfortable familiarity that had always characterized her relationships with her siblings and children. "What happens now?" she whispered, afraid to hear the answer, but knowing she needed to understand the full scope of what was being decided about her family's future. "Relationship with the royal household. Effective immediately. Your family members will no longer have unsupervised access to royal residences," Charles said, his words measured and carefully chosen. "All future visits must be pre-approved through security channels, and interactions will be monitored according to standard protocols for non-royal family members." The clinical language couldn't disguise the devastating reality of what he was telling her. Her family was being treated as a security threat, stripped of the trust and access they had gradually earned over years of proving their loyalty and discretion. The informal, comfortable relationship that had made royal life bearable for her was being severed with bureaucratic efficiency. "They're supposed to arrive in an hour," she said, the practical reality of the immediate situation cutting through her emotional shock. "Tom and Annabelle are probably already on their way." "What am I supposed to tell them?" Charles's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she saw the man she had married rather than the king delivering an official decree. "Security will handle the immediate arrangements. Your family will be informed that today's visit has been postponed due to unexpected royal duties. We'll work out a longer-term communication strategy over the coming days." The euphemistic language couldn't hide the fact that her family was being turned away at the gates, probably wondering what they had done wrong and why they suddenly weren't welcome in a place they had come to consider a second home. The humiliation and confusion they would experience made her heart ache even more than her own devastation. Camilla stared at the evidence folder in front of her, her mind struggling to process the reality of what Charles was telling her. The afternoon light that had seemed so cheerful just minutes earlier now felt harsh and unforgiving as it illuminated the documents that would forever change her relationship with the people she loved most. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the folder, then stopped, uncertain whether she truly wanted to see the details of her family's alleged betrayal. "May I see the specific evidence?" she asked quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. Charles hesitated for a moment, then nodded and pushed the folder closer to her. As she opened it, the first thing that caught her eye was a phone record showing multiple calls from Annabelle's number to a contact listed as Daily Mirror News desk over the past 3 months. The dates corresponded with several private family gatherings at the palace. including her birthday celebration and a quiet dinner after Charles's recent minor surgery. She remembered how worried Annabel had been about Charles's health, how they had spoken at length about the family's concern for his well-being. The possibility that those intimate conversations might have been shared with journalists felt like a violation of everything sacred about family bonds. "There's more," Charles said gently, turning to another page. Phone records from Tom showed regular contact with someone listed as Media Relations, Parker Associates, a company that specialized in placing stories with entertainment magazines. The evidence showed a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence, private royal events followed by media. Stories containing details that only family members could have known. Camilla's hands shook as she read through a tabloid article dated just 2 weeks earlier. Headlined Queen Camilla's Private. Fears about Charles's health revealed. The story contained quotes that were almost verbatim from conversations she had shared with her family during a private dinner at Clarence's house. The accuracy of the details was devastating proof that someone she trusted implicitly had been recording or remembering her most vulnerable moments for public consumption. "I need to call them," she said suddenly, reaching for her mobile phone. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe they don't realize what they're doing, or perhaps they're being manipulated by someone else. Surely we can resolve this within the family." Charles gently placed his hand over hers, stopping her from making the call. "The security services have advised against any direct contact until they complete their full investigation. Any communication now could compromise their ability to understand the full scope of the situation and might even put you at risk if there are larger security implications. We haven't yet discovered." The suggestion that her own family might pose a security risk to her felt surreal and deeply painful. These were the people who had celebrated her engagement, who had stood by her during the difficult early years of public scrutiny, who had become an integral part of her children's lives. The idea that their love and loyalty might have been conditional or performative challenged everything she believed about human relationships. A soft knock on the study door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Charles called for entry, and his private secretary stepped into the room with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, Mrs. Elliot and Mr. Parker Bowles have arrived at the main gate. Security is currently explaining that today's visit has been postponed. They're asking to speak with Her Majesty directly." Camilla's heart broke a little more at the image of her sister and son standing confused at the palace gates, probably wondering what protocol they had unknowingly violated or what family emergency had suddenly made their presence unwelcome. She could picture Annabel's worried face and Tom's concerned questions, neither of them understanding that their entire relationship with the royal family was being re-evaluated based on evidence they hadn't yet seen. "Tell them I'll call this evening," Camilla managed to say, though she knew that conversation would be one of the most difficult of her life. How do you confront people you love with evidence of their betrayal? How do you maintain family relationships when trust has been fundamentally damaged? After the secretary left, Charles moved around the desk to sit beside her on the small sofa near the window. For the first time since the conversation began, he looked less like a king delivering an official decree and more like a husband trying to comfort his wife through an impossible situation. "I know this is devastating," he said softly. "I've been struggling with how to handle this for weeks. Part of me hoped the investigation would prove the suspicions wrong, that we'd find some innocent explanation for the patterns. But the evidence kept mounting, and the security implications became too serious to ignore." Camilla leaned back against the sofa cushions, feeling suddenly exhausted. The weight of royal life had always been challenging, but she had found strength in knowing that her family relationships remained genuine and uncomplicated by the formal protocols that governed most of her interactions. The possibility that even those connections had been tainted by the opportunities for profit or attention that came with royal association was almost too much to bear. "What about the children?" she asked, thinking of her grandchildren who had grown up visiting the palace, playing in the gardens and developing relationships with their step-grandfather, the king. How do I explain to them why they can't visit anymore? Why family gatherings are suddenly subject to security protocols? Charles was quiet for a long moment, clearly having wrestled with the same questions. We'll find ways to maintain relationships that are important to you and safe for the institution. Perhaps supervised visits or meeting at neutral locations where security concerns can be managed differently. This doesn't have to mean the end of all family contact. But Camilla understood that it would never be the same. The easy familiarity, the spontaneous phone calls, the comfortable assumption that family gatherings were private spaces where she could be herself, rather than the queen consort, all of that was ending. Even if relationships could be rebuilt, they would always carry the shadow of suspicion and the burden of formal oversight that she thought about the last family gathering just 3 weeks earlier, when everyone had seemed so normal, so loving, so genuinely happy to be together. Had someone been mentally cataloging details to share with journalists even then? Had her expressions of worry about Charles's demanding schedule been noted for future use in a media story? The retroactive poisoning of those memories felt like another layer of violation. I need some time to process this, she said finally. And I need to understand exactly what evidence exists before I can even think about how to move forward with my family relationships. Charles nodded, understanding that she needed space to grieve not just the immediate situation but also the loss of innocence about the people she had trusted most completely. The royal life had claimed many casualties over the years, but the destruction of family bonds felt particularly cruel and personal. 2 hours later, Camilla sat alone in her private sitting room, staring at her mobile phone as it buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls and text messages from her family members. The afternoon that was supposed to have been filled with laughter and catching up had turned into a nightmare of unanswered questions and growing panic among the people she loved most. Each ring of the phone felt like another small betrayal, knowing that she couldn't answer their calls without potentially compromising an ongoing security investigation. The messages were heartbreaking in their confusion and concern. Annabelle had texted, "Darling, security said you were called away on urgent royal business. I hope everything is all right. The children were so looking forward to seeing the palace gardens. Should we reschedule for next week?" The innocent assumption that this was a simple scheduling conflict made Camilla's chest tighten. With grief for the relationship, they had shared just that. Morning, Tom's messages were more direct and increasingly worried. "Mum, what's going on? The security officer couldn't give us any details about why we can't visit. Has something happened to Charles? Are you safe? Please call me back immediately." His protective concern, the same impulse that had driven him to defend her during the worst days of public criticism years earlier, now felt like salt in an open wound. Camilla walked to the window overlooking the gardens where her grandchildren had played just last month, chasing each other around the ancient oak trees while she and Charles watched from the terrace. Those children would grow up with a different relationship to royal life now, one marked by security protocols and formal restrictions rather than the easy familiarity they had known. The loss of that innocence felt like another casualty of circumstances beyond anyone's control. Her lady-in-waiting knocked softly before entering with a tea tray, setting it down on the small table with practiced quiet efficiency. "Ma'am, the king asked me to inform you that he's meeting with security officials to review the protocols for future family communications. He wants to ensure you understand all your options before making any decisions about how to proceed." The formal language couldn't disguise the reality that her personal relationships were now matters of state security, subject to official review and institutional oversight. The woman who had once been free to call her sister on a whim or invite her children for spontaneous visits was now required to consider the broader implications of every family interaction. After her staff member left, Camilla finally opened the detailed security report that Charles had given her to review privately. The evidence was even more damaging when examined closely. Phone records showed not just contact with media outlets, but payments made to Annabelle's personal account from a public relations firm known for its celebrity client base. The amounts weren't large, but they represented a commercial relationship that transformed private family conversations into marketable commodities. The most devastating evidence came in the form of audio recordings that security services had legally obtained as part of their investigation. Listening to her own sister's voice discussing exclusive access to royal family insights with a journalist made Camilla feel physically ill. The conversation revealed a calculated approach to monetizing family relationships that went far beyond innocent gossip or accidental indiscretions. "The Queen Consort really trusts me," Annabelle's voice said on the recording. "She tells me things about Charles's health concerns that she doesn't share with anyone else. I can give you details about their private life that you won't get from any other source." The casual betrayal of intimate confidences, spoken in the tone one might use to discuss the weather, shattered something fundamental in Camilla's understanding of their relationship. Even more painful was evidence that Tom had been using his position as the Queen Consort's son to gain access to royal events specifically for the purpose of gathering information to sell. Photos taken at family gatherings had been provided to magazines, along with detailed descriptions of private conversations and family dynamics. His recent interest in attending more royal functions, which Camilla had interpreted as growing comfort with his role in the royal family, was revealed to have been motivated by commercial opportunities rather than genuine family affection. The security report noted that both siblings had apparently been recruited by a media company that specialized in developing inside sources within high-profile families. The systematic nature of their information gathering suggested this wasn't a recent development or a momentary lapse in judgment, but rather an ongoing business relationship that had been deliberately concealed from the family members they were exploiting. Camilla found herself reviewing recent conversations through this new lens, remembering moments when family members had seemed unusually interested in details about Charles's schedule, her own health concerns, or private discussions between royal family members. Questions she had interpreted as loving concern were revealed to have been information gathering exercises designed to produce marketable stories. The most heartbreaking realization was that her trust had made her an easy target. Her desire to maintain normal family relationships despite the constraints of royal life had led her to be more open with her family than security protocols typically allowed. She had shared her fears about Charles's health, her struggles with public criticism, and her private thoughts about other royal family members because she needed people in her life who knew her as more than just a public figure. As evening approached, Camilla knew she could no longer avoid making the phone call she had been dreading. Her family deserved to know that their actions had been discovered, and she needed to understand whether there was any possibility of salvaging relationships that had clearly been damaged beyond easy repair. She dialed Annabelle's number with trembling fingers, unsure whether she was hoping for an explanation that would excuse the betrayal or dreading the confirmation that people she loved had deliberately exploited her trust for financial gain. The phone rang 3 times before her sister's familiar voice answered with obvious relief. "Camilla, darling, I've been so worried. What happened today? Why couldn't we visit? Is Charles all right?" The concerned tone that had always comforted Camilla now sounded different, potentially calculated rather than genuinely caring. She found herself analyzing her sister's words for signs of manipulation or hidden motives, a level of suspicion that felt foreign and exhausting. "We need to talk," Camilla said quietly. "About phone calls you've been making to journalists, and payments you've been receiving for information about our family. About the trust that's been broken and the relationships that may never be the same." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes about the conversation that was about to follow. The silence that followed Camilla's words stretched across the phone connection, like a chasm opening between two people who had shared a lifetime of sisterly confidences. When Annabelle finally spoke, her voice had lost all trace of its earlier warmth and concern, replaced by a defensive tone that Camilla had never heard from her before. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, But you're completely misunderstanding the situation, Annabelle said, her words coming quickly as if speed might somehow make them more convincing. Yes, I've spoken to journalists, but only to correct false stories about you. I've been trying to protect your reputation, not damage it. Camilla closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger at what felt like another layer of deception. The evidence she had reviewed made it clear that the media contacts were ongoing and profitable, not isolated attempts at damage control. The careful documentation of phone records, payments, and story placements painted a picture of systematic exploitation that couldn't be explained away by good intentions. The security services have recordings, Annabelle, Camilla said quietly. I've heard your voice discussing exclusive access and the commercial value of our family relationships. This wasn't about protecting anyone. This was about making money from private information that you gained through my trust in you. Another pause. Longer this time? And when Annabelle spoke again, her voice carried a note of desperation mixed with defiance. You have no idea how difficult it's been watching you live in palaces while the rest of us struggle with ordinary problems. Do you know how it feels to have people constantly ask about your famous sister while you're worried about paying your mortgage? The admission hit Camilla like a physical blow, not because of its cruelty, but because of the resentment it revealed. Her sister's struggles had been real, and Camilla had tried to help in ways that wouldn't create awkward dependencies or public scrutiny. But apparently her efforts had been insufficient to prevent the family relationships from becoming poisoned by envy and financial pressure. If you needed money, why didn't you come to me directly? Camilla asked, her voice breaking slightly. We're family. I would have helped you find a way through any difficulties without compromising everyone's privacy and security. And then what? Annabelle replied bitterly. Become another one of your charity cases? Live on handouts from Queen Camilla while pretending to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you could spare between your royal duties? At least this way, I was earning something from a relationship that cost me my own identity. The pain in her sister's voice was genuine, even if her choices had been inexcusable. Camilla began to understand that the betrayal hadn't emerged from simple greed or malice, but from deeper wounds created by the fundamental imbalance that royal life had introduced into their family dynamic. The sister who had once been her equal and closest confidant had been relegated to supporting player status in a life that seemed increasingly glamorous and privileged from the outside. What about Tom? Camilla asked, needing to understand the full scope of what had been happening within her family. Was he involved in this from the beginning, or did you recruit him after establishing your own media contacts? Annabelle's hesitation told her everything she needed to know before the words came. Tom has his own financial pressures, with the children's school fees and the mortgage on the new house. The media company approached him separately after they realized he had different access points to royal information. We didn't coordinate our activities, but we both understood the opportunities that existed. The clinical way her sister described the systematic exploitation of family relationships made Camilla feel sick. Her son and sister hadn't just made impulsive mistakes or fallen victim to outside manipulation. They had entered into business, arrangements that required ongoing betrayal of family trust. Every conversation, every family gathering, every private moment had been potential material for commercial exploitation. The recordings indicate that you both signed formal contracts with the media company, Camilla continued, forcing herself to confront the full reality of the situation. This wasn't casual gossip or accidental leaks. You were being paid as professional sources with specific obligations to provide regular content. The contracts were just formalities to protect everyone legally, Annabelle said. But her defensive tone suggested she understood how damaging this revelation would be. We never shared anything that would actually hurt you or Charles. We were careful to only discuss things that would make you look good or generate positive publicity. The distinction felt meaningless to Camilla, who understood that the violation lay not in the content of the stories, but in the betrayal of trust they represented. Whether the media coverage was positive or negative was irrelevant when it came from family. Members who were being paid to exploit private relationships for public consumption. Did you ever consider what this would? Do to the children? Camilla asked, thinking of her grandchildren who had grown up believing their grandmother lived in a fairy tale palace where they were always welcome. They're going to grow up knowing that their parents sold stories about family gatherings where they played innocent games in the royal gardens. For the first time in the conversation, Annabelle's voice broke with genuine emotion. We thought we could keep the business arrangements separate from the family relationships. We told ourselves that we were just sharing harmless details that would help people feel more connected to the royal family. We never intended for it to become this complicated or to hurt anyone. The naivety of that justification revealed how completely her family had misunderstood the nature of royal life and the responsibilities that came with access to private royal spaces. They had treated royal relationships as normal family connections that could be compartmentalized and partially monetized without affecting the emotional bonds between family members. Camilla felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as she realized that this conversation was just the beginning of a much larger process of rebuilding or ending relationships that had been fundamental to her sense of identity. The practical questions alone were overwhelming. How to maintain any connection with grandchildren whose parents couldn't be trusted. How to handle family medical emergencies when normal communication channels were compromised by security concerns. How to preserve any remnants of the family support system that had helped her navigate the challenges of royal life. I need time to decide how to move forward, Camilla said finally. The security investigation is still ongoing, and there may be legal implications that I don't fully understand yet. But I want you to know that the casual family relationship we've always shared is over. Any future contact will have to be on completely different terms. Camilla, please, Annabelle pleaded. We're still family, despite everything that's happened. Surely we can find a way to rebuild the trust that's been damaged. The children love you and they don't understand why they suddenly can't visit their grandmother anymore. But Camilla knew that rebuilding trust would require more than apologies and promises. It would need systematic changes in behavior, transparency about past actions, and acceptance of new boundaries that would protect both the royal institution and her own emotional well-being. 3 weeks later, Camilla stood in the same palace corridor where her world had begun to unravel. But everything felt different now. The investigation had concluded with a comprehensive report that documented not just the media, relationships her family had maintained, but also the sophisticated network of royal household staff and extended family members who had been recruited by various media companies seeking inside access to the monarchy. The scope of the betrayal had been much larger than anyone initially realized. Lavra, her daughter, had also been found to have informal arrangements with lifestyle magazines, sharing details about royal fashion choices and interior design preferences. Even more devastating was the discovery that Tom had been photographing private areas of royal residences during family visits. Images that were later sold to publications. Interested in showcasing the private lives of the royal family, Charles found her in the blue drawing room, the same space where she had planned to host the family gathering that never happened. She was sitting quietly on the window seat, looking out at the gardens where her grandchildren used to play, but her expression had changed from the raw grief of 3 weeks earlier to something harder and more resolved. The final report came this morning, he said gently, taking a seat beside her. Security has identified 12 separate individuals within our extended circle who had some form of commercial relationship with media outlets. It appears this has been going on for nearly 2 years. Camilla nodded, having expected that the investigation would reveal additional layers of betrayal beyond her immediate family members. The systematic nature of the media infiltration suggested that this was an industry-wide problem affecting multiple royal households. Not just a personal family crisis that she could have prevented through better judgment or clearer boundaries. What happens now? She asked, her voice steady but tired. The past weeks had aged her in ways that went beyond physical